Okay, so welcome everyone. I think it's time we made a start and people are still coming in, but it's probably a good time to make a start. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our first webinar in our knowledge sharing series, where we will be sharing insights from our community electrification programs. Now, this webinar this afternoon focuses specifically on initial household engagement. Future webinars will cover the advice process, local installer engagement, and also program outcomes. So we aim to have one of these webinars each quarter, and there'll be at least another 3 in this series. My name is David Dungable and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at ZapCat. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wonnarua people in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales. Great to see everyone coming through and letting us know where you are. Thank you for doing that. I think we've got someone from every state, including Queensland, WA, Victoria, Tasmania. So that's really great to see. Thank you. My role at ZapCat is to engage with communities across Australia and to assist those communities in reducing community emissions. If I haven't met you, please feel free to connect outside of this call. It would be great to catch up. We do acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on today and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and we look to the oldest living culture for their wisdom and guidance as we move forward together. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. We have muted everyone's microphone for the duration of the webinar. We do invite questions, and we'd ask that you use the chat to ask questions, and at the end we will endeavour to cover as many questions as we can in the remaining time. We are also happy to stay beyond the hour that's been allowed for this call if we haven't covered all of the questions. We are recording today's session and we will be sending that recording together with the research document to everyone that's registered for this webinar this afternoon. So you'll receive that in the next couple of days. That's the housekeeping done, so it's time to make a start, and I would like to introduce Prosca Bitson-Bullen, who is the CEO of ZapCat, to take us through the agenda for this afternoon. Thanks, Prosca.
Thanks, David, and welcome everyone. It is so exciting to see more than 100 people on this webinar. I am the CEO of ZapCat. I'm also one of the co-founders, and I founded ZapCat because I found the process of electrifying my own house really difficult. I'm actually not from this sector. I'm from the healthcare sector, and it was just a really hard process to get through. So we created ZapCat to help people like me and lots of other people in the community who would like to electrify but find it challenging. So it's absolutely fabulous to see so many people here today interested in what we've discovered through running our programs. So today we're going to start with just a really quick introduction to what we do at ZapCat. I know a lot of you may not have seen us before, so I'm going to explain a little bit about how our program works, just at a very high level. If you've got further questions about how the program works, as David mentioned, we're really happy to stay on at the end and answer any of those if they go beyond the analysis that we're presenting today. After doing the introduction, I'm going to tell you about all the different channels we've tested to reach residents and households, which ones have worked, which ones definitely did not work. Then I'll talk a little bit about messaging. So what has worked in those communications and what hasn't. I'll talk about call to action. So what are we actually asking people to do in those messages? And then a little bit about regional variations and patterns that we've seen in different locations before we go into Q&A. As David said, love to get questions. Feel free to put them in the chat as I go through. Really keen to see what you're all interested in. So getting started, a little bit about us. So if you don't know us, we are a certified social enterprise helping Australians transition their homes to clean energy by electrifying everything. We are certified by Social Traders. We work with local councils and other organisations that want to help their communities electrify, and we run programs to assist residents in that location to move through the process. So our community electrification program is very broad. It covers all types of electrification. So we help people with solar and batteries, hot water heat pumps, EV charging, induction cooking, reverse cycle air conditioning. We've also added thermal comfort into the mix because we've seen demand for that. So insulation and draft proofing and energy efficiency for low-income households and renters. Now, we want to be very inclusive in our programs. As a social enterprise, part of our mission is to help people who face barriers to transition. So that includes your low-income households and renters, but it also includes people in different types of buildings. So our programs include houses, townhouses, low and high-rise apartments, all kinds of apartments, both the individual units and the whole block strata, as well as social and community housing and small and medium-sized businesses. The way our program works is we help residents through the end-to-end process of making an electrification upgrade. So we start with curious residents and we reach them through all the channels and messages that I'm going to talk about today. Once we've got their attention, we ask them to do an instant cost savings and rebates estimate. These are things that we've designed. They're on our website. You answer a few questions and in 2 minutes, you get a rough idea for that particular upgrade of cost savings and rebates for your particular circumstance. That's a really, really low bar. It doesn't take very long to do. But then if you're interested in moving forward, what we do is we connect you with one of our advisors. So we have an in-house team of advisors who specialize in different types of upgrades. We connect you through to them. Either you get a Zoom call consult, or you can go back and forth via email. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about who prefers what. But after that consultation with the advisor then provides you with a personalized recommendation for your home or your building, specifying things like, what's the ideal system size, what types of models would be suitable for you, what are the things you need to think about, roughly how much should that cost, what rebates again. And then if you're interested in progressing through to a quote, we vet local installers in the area. So it's really important to us as a social enterprise that we support local business. So we vet local installers and we can then connect local residents through with local installers. Once they've been connected through with a local installer, they can collect quotes. They can also get quotes from anywhere else they would like. And they can bring those quotes back to the advisor who then has a look at the quotes, lets them know, which ones are suitable for their house, or maybe there are some quotes that are not suitable. Is the price in a reasonable range? And then we handhold them through that process all the way through to installation. So we have a live dashboard for our program. It shows where everybody's up to. It shows how many installations there've been, but it also shows projected emissions reductions from those installations, household bill savings, and revenue to those local businesses. Now, most importantly, all of our advice is free to the resident and completely independent. So we are funded through local councils or through other organisations that want to help their community electrify. We don't collect any lead fees or commissions in the process. It's completely independent advice. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, as David said, this is a series of knowledge sharing webinars, and we're relatively new. Our longest program has been running for a little over 12 months. So what we're going to do is, as we get enough aggregate data for each stage in the process, we're going to run a knowledge sharing webinar where we share the aggregate data and insights from that particular step. So today's step, we're going to be talking about how do we get curious residents to do an instant estimate, and what percentage of those people then go through to a personalised recommendation. As David mentioned, future webinars are going to cover all the other steps in this process as we get enough data to talk about that particular step. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that we started focused mostly on electrification and we added thermal comfort later. So the data I'm going to present today is really about electrification. We will have a separate knowledge sharing session on thermal comfort and energy efficiency for low-income households and renters once we have enough data for those areas. And similarly, we don't have enough data yet on social and community housing and small and medium-sized businesses to do a knowledge sharing webinar on that. So the data I'm presenting today is really about all the different types of residential buildings, but including strata, including individual units. So the other thing that's really important to know about our programs is that we aim to reach a mainstream audience. And we have done a lot of research into the different personas involved in household electrification, what motivates them and what level of motivation they have, as well as what barriers they face. So our program aims to target these personas that I've highlighted here in yellow. Now, there's a very good chance that if you're on this webinar right now, you are either an eco-nerd or an optimization geek, or maybe both of them at once. That can happen. And while we love you, you already know what to do. Okay, you've already got the knowledge. You've probably already done your house. You are a fabulous advocate to tell other people. But what we're trying to do with our program is reach everybody else. Now, myself, I actually fall in the guilty time poor category. I had no idea what I was doing. I was motivated by the environment, but I was always too busy to get around to doing it, and it all just seemed a little bit hard. But there's lots of other different types of people that are motivated by different things and face different barriers. So our aim is to reach them. Now, the skeptics down there in the corner, the climate skeptics, we don't have a solution for climate skeptics. However, it is very, very important that when we're running a program, we don't attract the trolling of climate skeptics, because if we attract climate skeptic trolling, what that does is that brings negative publicity onto our campaign. That's a problem for us. It's a problem for other residents who are trying to do this. They get put off. And it's absolutely a problem for a local council or an organisation that's running this. We really can't have that type of negative attention on a program. So while we do have target audiences, we also have an audience that we need to manage. And I'm going to share. We've actually discovered quite a lot of things about how to avoid trolling. So I'm going to share that later on. So just quickly, before I get into the results, this is the sample. So 2,821 residents that we engaged between February 2024 and November 2025. Those residents completed 3,466 instant estimates. Quite a few people were interested in more than one type of upgrade, and they received 1,269 personalised recommendations from an advisor. We have quite a lot of different suburbs, building types, and socio-demographic profiles covered in this data, but it is aggregate data only. While we do run programs with local councils, we're not going to be sharing LGA-specific data today because it's up to the council as to whether or not they want to share the results of their program. So everything today is just going to be aggregated. And as David said, we will send the full report after the webinar. A few limitations just to point out, the data comes just from our programs, and our programs to date have mostly been run in Sydney, with some regional programs just getting started in regional pilots, but there's a smaller amount of data from there. So the insights that we've got here might not apply in your local area, but maybe you can get some ideas from listening to what we've tried for things to try in your local area, and you might discover completely different results. And the other thing to point out, this isn't a formal research study. These lessons are based on our applied field-based data. We are doing some great work with researchers at different universities, and hopefully in the future we'll have more of a research level analysis to present today, but please keep in mind this is applied field-based data. So jumping right here into the channels. Lesson 1 from this analysis, scaling a program requires channels that reach a mass audience. Now, how many of these channels you need really varies by location. So before I talk about the types of channels, we've noticed 2 common patterns. In some LGAs, we try a range of different channels, and one channel creates such a huge amount of interest that it really becomes the one channel to rule them all. So we have had some cases where, you know, we've tried one channel and there's just been an absolutely overwhelming level of interest to the point where we have to shut that channel down very quickly, and the entire program gets booked out and we end up with a wait list. So that has happened. There are also plenty of locations where that hasn't happened, where we've actually had to run multiple channels, multiple ongoing communications, repeated communications on many different channels to get an ongoing stream of people into the program. And these are 2 really different patterns, but we have noticed that every LGA that we've worked in has kind of fallen into one of these 2. And both of them work. So we are yet to encounter a location where we are unable to get people into the program. That's not to say it won't happen in the future. It just hasn't happened yet. But we almost always have to try quite a range of different channels before we land on the ones that work for that particular location. Now, in the report, you're going to see a table like this that's much, much longer, that has all the results from all the different channels that we've tried. I've just picked a few here that have worked really well and some that were a bit surprising in that they didn't work. So starting with the ones that worked really well. A flyer in the rates notice is consistently the most effective channel that we have found. When a local council can put one of our flyers into the rates notice that goes out to all the residents, in many cases that has been the one channel to rule them all. That has actually created a huge amount of demand for people coming into the program. An ongoing ZapCat social media advertising campaign. We run our own social media advertising that runs on an ongoing basis that basically fills people's social media feed with advertisements for the program. That's also been quite effective in many cases. and general council email newsletters that go out to all the residents, so not sustainability specific ones, but general ones that go everywhere, have also been really effective. But you'll see that for all of those three, the typical audience is in the thousands to the tens of thousands. So these really are mass channels. And the percentage of people in that channel that do an instant estimate from one communication is typically between 0.5 and 2%. So what does this mean? It means that in a mainstream audience, most people, most of the time, are not thinking about energy. And you really have to reach a very large number of people to grab those few people that are thinking about energy at that moment and get them into the program. And sometimes, depending on how big that channel is, that can be a large amount of people. Or if your channel is a bit smaller, you may need to send that communication repeatedly, and each time you pick up 0.5 to 2%. And if you do it over and over, you can build it up and you can create a program that has hundreds of people in it. Now you can see here that of the people that do the instant estimates, between 35 and 50% of those people actually continue on through to a personalized recommendation. But you can also see that when you add all those numbers together, that can result in a really wide range for each channel, which is why we found that in every location, we actually have to systematically test each channel to work out which ones are going to be effective in that location. But these three have been consistently the most effective. It doesn't mean they work in every location, but they would be the ones we'd try first. Now, a couple that, were good, they definitely brought people in, but were maybe less effective than we expected. In-person community events. We've done lots and lots of events. We love events. There are great reasons to do events. You meet people in the community, you form great partnerships. But as you can see from these numbers, you can't create a program with hundreds of people in it on the back of events. To do an event, we normally send 2 staff members for an entire day, typically for a sustainability fair, for example, and we may only get between 3 and 14 personalized recommendations out of that. So when we actually look at the cost per household in our program, events are the most expensive. So there are many reasons to do them, but we have not been able to generate a large volume of inquiries just through running events. Similarly, council's social media posts that are organic, even when they're boosted, we found that they've actually generated a really small number, which surprised us because there are so many people who follow their local council on social media. But there's 2 reasons for this. Meta these days, unless you're paying for advertising, they really restrict who sees your post. But also, we know from running our own social media campaign, people have to see it 6 or 7 times before they actually take action. And an organic post, typically people only see once. So these are some of the lessons from our channels, but have a look at the full report for the full table. It's really interesting. All right, lesson 2 on channels. Local councils, as you can see from those channels, the 2 of the best channels were local council channels. So local councils are really well placed to engage residents, but their communications can cause some very large spikes in inquiries. So here are inquiries coming into ZapCat, and you see 2 really large spikes. They are both rates notices. And what that means is we've got to be ready to scale our operations up and down really quickly to be able to handle those inquiries. Now, you might wonder, what does the flyer look like? What could possibly cause such a large spike? It's a really boring flyer. There's nothing particularly exciting about this flyer. It is simply a flyer that says that the program exists and has 2 QR codes, one to do an instant estimate and one to book a virtual consult. So there's nothing especially exciting about the flyer. It's more that it reaches a mass audience. So as I said, we need to do a lot of work to manage these spikes in volume, and it's fabulous that council channels can create these spikes. So to be able to be ready to actually manage the spike, we've done quite a number of things. We've obviously got the instant estimates that allow people to self-service really quickly. We use a lot of technology to scale our service. We've got our in-house advisory team who are able to bump up their hours when needed in a spike. We've done a lot of work on our quality assurance processes to make sure that when we're delivering advice at such a large volume, that's quality advice. So we have a lot of quality auditing procedures. And obviously, we also need to make sure we communicate realistic timelines to residents so that if there's a really big spike in inquiries, rather than our usual 1 to 2 business day turnaround, it might be a 3 or 4 business day turnaround, and we're letting people know that. So now talking a little bit about messaging. So these are the channels that we've used to get out there, but what are we actually putting in the channels? So lesson 3, this is a really critical lesson for us. This is another one that surprised us. product-specific messages reach the widest audience. Avoid persuasive messaging. So again, this table will be in the report with a bit more analysis, but there are 3 types of messaging that we've tried at ZapCat over many, many different programs and in many locations. The first is general program messaging. So this promotes the overall program using general terms like energy efficiency or home energy advice or electrification. So you can see a couple of examples there, like free independent home energy advice for residents. We have discovered that these types of messages mostly bring in eco-nerds and optimization geeks, because these are the people that care about energy. They love the term energy efficiency. They know what it means. It motivates them to do something. But only 16% of people coming into our program have come in through one of these messages when we run our social media campaign. And as I said, they're mostly eco-nerds and optimization geeks who already know what they're doing. So they're not our primary audience, even though we love them. Now, the next type of messaging that we've tried is product-specific messaging. Now, this promotes advice for a specific type of product using really simple, non-emotional language. So, for example, free independent home solar advice. Now, it's really specific there that you can get advice on solar. Or wondering how much a home EV charger would cost. Again, we're identifying the specific upgrade. This is the most popular type of messaging. This is what gets most people into our program. 76% of people coming through our social media campaign come through a product-specific message rather than a general program message. And we find that those people tend to be the ones that are in all the other categories. All the other categories actually have no idea what energy efficiency is. It's not something that motivates them, but maybe they've got a neighbor that's installed solar and they're a bit curious. Maybe someone mentioned something to them about induction cooking and they're a bit curious. And so they're thinking really about the specific products and upgrades rather than thinking about energy as a whole or electrification as a whole process. Now, this has a few really important implications for how we design our communications. So obviously, when you've got a program, you do have to launch the program. Like at some point, there has to be a general program announcement saying that this program is running. And what you can see here is anytime we talk about our program in general, we always identify the specific products. And we've got a whole little set of icons here so that if you just glance at this very briefly, yes, the headline is a general program headline, but you can see really quickly, without even reading the whole thing, which products you can get help with. Similarly, when we do it in writing, we use bullet points so that someone who's just skimming through the newsletter can quickly see, oh, EV charging, yeah, I was thinking about that. I would like to get some advice on that. It also means that when we're running our campaigns, we do create a whole series of product-specific landing pages. We create product-specific posts. We create product-specific newsletter articles. So it's not a case of there's one landing page for our program and there's just one entry point. There's actually many, many different entry points. And you can see here that a hot water heat pump post on social media goes directly to a hot water heat pump landing page in order to keep people focused. Now, once we get them in on that upgrade, we then talk to them about everything else and we educate them about electrification and energy efficiency, but we've got to get them in first. Now, the third type of messaging, which is where things get really interesting, is persuasive messaging. Communication theory would suggest that using persuasive messaging, things like emotional messaging, social proof, statistics, things like that to persuade people would be a really good way to go. Examples of this would be things like, energy efficient homes in Sydney sell for 23% more. That's from a Domain report. Avoid bill shock. Join thousands of others who've cut their energy bills with solar. That's social proof. But what we've actually discovered is that these types of highly persuasive messages, they are troll magnets. The primary audience engaging with highly persuasive messaging are skeptics. And only 8% of people coming into our program have actually come through one of these persuasive messages. So I can give you a really good example. This is our most trolled social media post ever. It is a really great quote from the Asthma Australia CEO about the health impacts of induction cooking. And here are some of the lovely messages that we've received on this post from skeptics who, they feel like that we are trying to persuade them and they don't like that. Now, if we replace that, which we did, we tested that against this, a very, very boring, very, very bland product-specific message, curious how much it would cost to switch to induction cooking. We had 3 times the number of instant estimates completed from this post compared to the previous one. So we got many more people into the program. There were no negative comments. There were no comments at all. There were no positive comments. There were no negative comments. There weren't even any emojis. It's the most boring thing ever. You just scroll past it, and if you're interested in induction, you click on it. So what we've discovered is that it's still important to use persuasive messaging, but it's got to be much further down the process. So we don't use it as the front of our program because it's just going to attract negative attention. It's going to cause a lot of work for us to moderate the negative comments, and potentially it jeopardizes the program from all that negative attention. All we've done is we've moved all the persuasive messaging later on in the process. So of course the advisors have all of this information ready and handy to explain to people, but we don't put it up front. Okay. Lesson number 4, community engagement works best when all groups are involved. So as I said at the start, our program is very inclusive. We can run programs that cover all types of electrification and all types of buildings. Sometimes we get asked to run a program that just targets one type of building. So for example, just apartment blocks, or one type of upgrade, so just solar or just EV charging. What we've discovered is that anytime we run a program that's just on a narrow vertical, everyone else shows up anyway. And it doesn't matter who you're targeting, everyone else is coming. Why does this happen? Well, our instant estimates are very shareable. So people, once they've done it, they like to share it with their friends and family, but those people are not necessarily in the target building type. Council's mass communications do reach all audiences. They're not necessarily that easy to target. And electrification is an interconnected process. So it's really hard for us to talk to someone about solar without also talking about whether they plan to get an EV or, whether they plan to switch off gas. So it's very interconnected. And this makes sense because a lot of research has demonstrated the effectiveness of place-based energy transitions and word of mouth in making this all happen. So our conclusion is that the most effective programs include all building and upgrade types in the target location. So rather than having this narrow focus of a particular building and upgrade type, having a program in which anyone can come, interested in any type of upgrade in any kind of building, and we take them wherever they're at. That seems to work better. Now, the other really great benefit of having a completely inclusive program is that it's very, very easy to adapt to changing circumstances. So for example, if you've got an all-inclusive program, if suddenly the state government announces a grant program for apartment solar, you don't need to create a new program. We just do a new social media post and a new landing page and off we go. Equally, if councillors pass a resolution to provide more support to renters, same thing. We can handle that in our program already. New social media post, new landing page, new communications, and we're done. Or if there's a heat wave and we've really got to get people, on cooling their home, same thing. We can respond to that very quickly if we have an inclusive program. If we don't have an inclusive program, what happens is the circumstances change and we've got to set up a new vertical. So we really do find that the inclusive program works much more effectively. Now a little bit about call to action. So I've spoken about the channels. I've spoken about what we put in the channels, but what are we actually asking people to do? A low commitment call to action increases engagement, lesson number 5. This is an example of one of our landing pages. There are 2 buttons, get an instant estimate and book a free virtual consultation. 96% of people choose to do the instant estimate first. If we remove that button, and we've tried this, and we just have the book a virtual consultation button, some of those 96% will book a virtual consultation, but most of them will leave because booking a virtual consultation, even though it seems like a really good idea, is just a lot of mental effort. You've got to think about when you're available. You've got to check your calendar. Maybe you need to ask your spouse if they're around. So, we really think it's very important to have the instant estimates, particularly if we're going for a mainstream audience. And anytime we launch a new instant estimate, like when we launched our apartment solar instant estimate, we had a 4 times increase in the number of engagements on that topic within 1 month of launching it. So we know the low commitment call to action is really important. Lesson number 6, most residents prefer to receive advice via email, but we really need multiple channels. So as I mentioned at the start, there's different ways that once you've done an instant estimate that you can then connect with an advisor. And you can see here, we've got 3 different methods for doing that. There's video call, there's email, and there's phone. 74% of people choose to do it via email. And we find that they are more likely to be the mainstream personas. They're less motivated, they're more time poor, but we also get culturally and linguistically diverse communities using email because they're able to use their translation software on the email. So we often see people using the translation software or working with a family member to translate things. And it's sometimes a lot easier for them to do it that way rather than doing a video call. 25% of people choose video call. Anecdotally from our advisors, they are more likely to be eco-nerds, optimization geeks, and retirees, because those first two groups are highly motivated and retirees have more time available. 1% of people do it via phone. It's really important to have this channel available. It is only 1%, but these are seniors and other people who face challenges engaging digitally, and they call our landline, and we then schedule a time for the advisor to call them back on their mobile phone or their landline. So a little bit about regional variation before we jump into Q&A. Lesson number 7. There's really big differences in engagement rates by location. Now, as I said, I'm not going to present the differences between different LGAs, but what I am going to show you is the differences by socioeconomic status, because we have found a statistically significant relationship there. Here is a chart. Yellow is the percentage of the population that have done an instant estimate, and green is the percentage of those people who then went through to a recommendation. And what you can see here is we get the highest percentage of instant estimates in the middle to high income postcodes. It drops a little bit in the very high to extremely high socioeconomic status. There's various theories about why that might be. It may be that they don't feel, as much pressure on their bills, and so it's less interesting to them. There may be other reasons. But you can see here, the low to middle, is quite a bit lower engagement. Although once they do the instant estimate, quite a few people do go through to get a recommendation. Now, we have, based on these results, we are working on, and we have developed a new program stream for low-income households and particularly vulnerable households, because we've identified that our current channels and messaging and processes are not reaching them as well as we'd like. So we have a new program stream, and we will have data available on that. So there'll be a separate session on that. One thing, I nearly fell off my chair at these results. We have some locations where 96% of dwellings are freestanding houses and other locations where only 11% are freestanding houses. And it would have made sense to me if engagement was higher in locations with freestanding houses because it's actually easier to electrify them. That is not the case. We actually had equal engagement regardless of the building type. And we suspect that there could be different reasons for this, but one reason could be that our program is very inclusive. We have had strata at the forefront from the very beginning. And so we have separate landing pages for apartments, blocks, apartment units. We work with a lot of strata committees. So it may be a reflection of the way we run our program, or there may be another explanation. We don't know. Lesson 8, this is our last lesson before we jump into Q&A. Interest in different types of upgrades varies by existing solar panel coverage. So in all locations, and this is the percentage of instant estimates by upgrade type, in all locations, the highest level of interest has been in solar panels. That's, absolutely by far the highest. And you can see that there's interest in all the other upgrade types, but solar is really dwarfing them. But it does depend on obviously what the existing solar panel coverage is. So yellow is areas with lower existing solar panel coverage, so they're below the national average coverage. And green is areas with higher existing solar panel coverage. And you can see that in the green areas, we've got more people interested in batteries. That makes sense. Slightly more interest in hot water heat pumps, significantly more interest in induction, and more interest in home EV charging. And what we've seen is that solar it's like an entry point into the rest of electrification. Most people who haven't done anything at all, they start by asking us about solar. And then once they've got their solar panels, they go, why am I paying for gas? This doesn't make sense. Let me go and do everything else. And then when they've done all of that, they go, oh, let's replace the car. We could charge the car off the solar. And then they start looking at EVs and EV charging. So we feel that this reflects a natural entry point of people coming in through solar, and then that triggers the rest of the electrification process, particularly for people who are not eco-nerds and optimization geeks. They don't think of electrification as a process, but they can start to think of it that way if we get them in through solar. Now, we have a hypothesis, and in some future session, you'll find out if we were right about this, that there is another entry point, that there's an entry point through people purchasing EVs, because in certain locations, what we see is a large number of people coming in saying, I just bought a Tesla. Why did you buy a Tesla? Oh, it's a really cool car. It goes fast. It's like a really, really awesome gadget. Not necessarily a Tesla, could be any EV. But they're essentially, if I had to give them a persona, they're motorheads. They really like cars. And so they get the car first because it's cool. Then they show up and they say, I need an EV charger, like a really good one for my really great car. And then we say, well, what about solar panels? You could charge your car from the solar. It could be free. And then they enter electrification through the purchase of an EV. So we are planning to add EV advice. We do EV charger advice at the moment, but we are planning to add EVs themselves as a category of advice that we provide, because we believe that there's potentially a channel there for people coming through EVs, not necessarily having thought about anything else, and then we can get them in. So that's all of the high-level lessons that I've got for you today. There's more detail in the report, so we will be sending that through. Feel free to have a read through, but now it's over to Q&A. David, what have we got?
Yeah, no, we've got lots of great questions. Thank you. So I just thought we've got plenty of time, so I might just start at the top and work through. So the first question, and it's a good question, is do we vet finance providers? So as well as the installers, do we have vetted finance providers? And the answer is no, we don't. And the reason for that is that we don't engage in the commercial transaction. We leave the dollars and cents to be between the household and the installer. And those installers, most of our installers have finance options available. So it doesn't, although finance is important, and we know that one of the greatest barrier to electrification is for households to find the funding. It just doesn't suit our model to actually have finance providers on our books, so to speak. So we don't. The next question from Helen was, who trains the advisors at ZapCat doing the personalized recommendations, and are they paid? So the answer is yes, they are definitely paid. We have part-time employees who are providing that direct consultation to the households, and all of those advisors, we call them clean energy advisors, they all have existing qualifications in the particular area that they focus on. So for example, we have one advisor who focuses on energy efficiency, things like draft proofing, insulation, and everything else in terms of energy efficiency, and she has a NAFERS qualification. And likewise, we have other advisors who specialize in solar, and they have the necessary solar qualifications. So in terms of who's training them, we generally have the accredited advisors providing that advice directly to the households. Next question was around the Mission Impossible persona. What is that? Peroska, would you like to explain that one?
An excellent question. Mission Impossible is where you have a building that is so unusual, or a situation that is so strange that there's actually no technical solution to it. Or you believe there is no technical solution to it. In some cases, there's genuinely no technical solution. So at the moment, we do have a lot of people in apartment units who would like to get a hot water heat pump, but the space available on their balcony, or potentially they don't even have a balcony, does not allow them to get a hot water heat pump. What we do with those ones is we keep in touch with new technologies coming through. So we have, we keep on top of what are the new hot water heat pump models coming out? Is anybody, doing something for apartments? We give feedback where we can to encourage the development of new technologies in gaps that we've identified. But then you've got people who actually have sort of they've put themselves in that category. They've gone, oh, my roof is shaded. I can't get solar. That's not going to work. Or sometimes they've had a bit of bad advice. When I went to get solar for my own roof, and I have no background in this area, I had one installer tell me that you can't get solar, it wouldn't be worth it because it's shaded and also you're in strata. And I put myself in the Mission Impossible category, and so I just didn't look into it again. I actually have a fully functioning solar system. It works perfectly fine. The shading's really not that bad at all. And the strata we were able to work out. So we do a lot of work helping people to get out of Mission Impossible. Heritage is another really common one that puts people in that category. And again, you know, if we've got the right technical advice, in many cases we can find a solution, or if we can't, we're keeping on top of the market, trying to make sure that the market delivers solutions for those people.
So the next question was around those rates notices, and have councils allowed us to put those those flyers into rates notices? And the answer is yes, they certainly have. All of the programs we have in Sydney, all those councils are allowing us to place those simple flyers that you saw on screen into rates notices. It's a fairly low cost option for councils, and it's very effective. So yes, it is very possible, and it's happening in New South Wales. The next question was probably for you, Peroska, around Katie asked, what is an indicative budget for a social media outreach plan for a council? What sort of dollars does that involve from our perspective?
From our perspective, it's a few $100s a month. So it's not a huge budget, but what you get for that few $100s a month really varies. So in some locations, it is the one channel to rule them all. We spend a few $100s a month and the interest is just absolutely overwhelming. And so we turn it on for 2 days, we get a whole lot of people in, we turn it off, we turn it on again. Once we process those, you know, we get more people in. In other locations, we actually have to run it on a continuous basis, sometimes with an increased budget and increased frequency in order to get a stream of people coming through. So the results are really different, but we generally budget, you know, in the order of $200 to $500 a month, depending on what the reaction is from the local community.
A couple of questions from Ian. Have we considered community organisations as part of our program? And the answer is yes. Community groups are welcome into the program. We do ask, when we set up the program with the council, we do ask them whether or not they would like community groups and small businesses to be included. So that's an option that council can either decide to fund or not fund, but certainly we are more than happy to include community groups, scout halls, church halls, sporting groups, and also small businesses are welcome to join the program. Ian's other question was around the possibility of the NAFA's rating becoming mandatory for sales for when a property changes hands and or for rentals. And I think that is being talked about in New South Wales. You're very right, Ian. We would generally welcome that change if it was to occur. It would certainly bring about more awareness, particularly with landlords around the electrification and particularly the energy efficiency of the appliances that they have in rental properties. Of course, we would have to understand then if those reports were being done, you know, in great numbers, we would then have to understand what impact that would have on individual actions, because a rating is great and would support that, but then we would like to see that translated into actions being electrification and energy efficiency improvement. So yeah, generally that would be great. We would welcome that. The next question was from Lisa, and Lisa asked, how would a council solar bulk buy program fit into our program? Peroska, would you like to?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do sometimes run our program in parallel with a solar bulk buy. If the council has selected a particular installer for that solar bulk buy, we can vet that installer and include them in the program and include that as an option for people when they come through. So we can say, hey, you're interested in solar, that's fabulous. The council has this bulk buy option available. Here's what you can get through it. This is the installer that would be doing it. We have vetted them, and they can go and then engage with that solar bulk buy. Sometimes people people do want multiple quotes or comparisons. So they go, yep, I'd like to see that solar bulk buy, but I'd also like to see another quote or a comparison. And so we can then facilitate that. We act as a completely independent source of advice. And so, you know, we're just there to get the best outcome for the household. And if there's a really excellent solar bulk buy available, we're going to let them know about that. That goes for other council programs as well. It's quite common that councils, for example, they've got an induction cooktop you can borrow down at the library, or maybe they have some subsidized home energy assessments. We are able to then take people in whatever they're interested in and refer them to other council programs as needed. So we'd consider a solar bulk buy to be another council program.
The next question from Julie is around, do we try and redirect people who are interested in solar PV? Do we try and then talk to them about energy efficiency and insulation first? So if they're interested in solar, do we say, hey, that's great, but let's talk about the energy efficiency of your dwelling first? And the answer to that is no, we don't try and change why they're coming into the program. If someone comes in and they're interested in solar, we will gain their trust by dealing with that inquiry and helping them out with their questions and giving them potentially an introduction to a vetted installer for the solar. Having said that, though, late last year, we introduced a new instant estimate, which is focused on renters and anyone else that doesn't have money for those shiny things that a lot of people are adding to their homes, batteries and solar. So that instant estimate is really focused on low cost or no cost ideas that a renter or a low income earner could do to their dwelling to make it more energy efficient. I hope that answers your question, Julie. Next question from Melissa is, what proportion of recommendations convert to completed actions to electrify? Peroska, do you want to take that?
Great question. We are still collecting data on this. So our program, as I said, our longest running program has been going for just over 12 months. As a minimum, we're seeing at least 10% of people that we give a recommendation to actually going through with an installation that we've been able to confirm. In some cases, this has been as high as 20% after 12 months. So we don't have final numbers on that. For a lot of people, you know, we're asking them here to spend thousands of dollars. So understandably, many people say, that's fabulous, I'm really keen, I need to save up some money, or really, really keen, but I need to do that after I've done my renovation. So at this point from our early data, certainly 10%, in some cases up to 20%, but we've got an additional 10 to 20% of people that are saying, I'm going to do it in the future, and we've got a specific date to follow up with them. So watch this space. Probably later this year, after we've covered the other steps in the journey, we'll actually have significantly more data on the installation rates, and we'll do a knowledge sharing session specifically about those installation rates and do they vary by location, do they vary by product type, and so on.
So the next question that sort of follows on from that is from Jessica, and Jessica was saying it was interesting to hear about the similar engagement from different areas, you know, whether it be freestanding or not freestanding buildings. And Jessica's question is, well, did we see a difference then? If the engagement is similar, did we see a difference in the actual energy modifications and uptake? And Peroska, I'll let you answer that one.
It is a little bit too early to tell. And the reason for that is that the apartments, whether you've got an individual unit or a whole block, they have to go through strata approval. And so while we're not sure in the end, are we going to see a difference in the installation rate? That I would expect there would be. I might fall off my chair again, should there not be. But what we're definitely seeing is that the time required to get to installation, if you live in strata, is significantly longer. For whole block upgrades, certainly more than 12 months for shared solar or something like that. For individual units, townhouses have a fairly similar kind of completion rate to freestanding houses, because a lot of townhouses can actually get individual systems, and all they're doing is getting strata approval for a modification to their own unit. But where we're looking at whole block strata, it is absolutely taking significantly longer. So we won't be able to answer that question with clarity until probably later this year. But absolutely there's a difference in the time, and we expect there will be a difference in the installation rate.
The next question is, have you worked in Victoria? Prosca, would you like to take that one?
Good question. We have not run a full program in Victoria before. We have done a little bit of testing of our instant estimates, and there's certainly been some interest there on the instant estimates, but we have not run a full community electrification program there before. We would be very keen to. So, if anybody is listening from other states, we are absolutely looking at adapting our program for other states and territories, and we would like it to be available anywhere where there's interest and a need. Particularly if there are communities that are facing barriers where you feel like our program would be appropriate, and we're really open to adapting it where needed. So if you are in another state or territory, and you'd like to talk about adapting it for there, just do let us know.
The next question from Richard is, how good or not so good are our initial cost or energy savings estimates? And how do we do those estimates?
Great question. So the initial instant estimate is meant to be just that. It is an estimate. It is not perfect. It's normally, if you compare the instant estimate to kind of the final recommendation from an advisor who's actually, looked at the roof, looked at the situation, written a recommendation, it's normally plus minus 10, 15%. But it really varies depending on the strain, the unusual circumstances. So for your average house, it's often quite on point. But if there's really unusual circumstances like heritage or something like that, something really complicated, that's where it tends to have a greater margin for error. But it is intended to be just an estimate. So the way we see it is your instant estimate is just your really, really quick ballpark. Because a lot of people in mainstream, they have no idea even what the ballpark is. Like they don't even know how many zeros. So it's just to give them a rough sense of the ballpark. And then the next thing from the advisor, the personalized recommendation, is a much more refined estimate, having had a conversation with the household. In the case of solar, having looked at their roof on near maps, having gathered more information. And then the only point at which you get an actual final number or a final system size is when the installer comes to do a site inspection, because you really need that installer, the quality installer, to come and do a site inspection and make a final recommendation on what can actually be installed. So it's a process of going from a kind of a broader estimate and making that more and more narrow up until the point where you actually get a quote with a specific system size and a price. How we do it is we've built the instant estimates. They have a lot of different variables built into them. There's a lot of questions that people have to answer about their situation, but we do try and keep the questions to a minimum. So, we've got to balance the accuracy with actually getting people through and interested. And we've done a lot of testing on them as well.
Now, another common question that's being asked in the chat is, how do we find and vet the installers? And do we use organizations like Solar Quotes to provide quotes to households? So I'll quickly explain this. We don't use Solar Quotes. We don't use any of those mass quoting services. Our model is to use local installers in the community that are part of the business community in that LGA. And we go out to those installers in that community and we tell them about the program and how we operate. And then we basically do an expressions of interest. We don't talk to every single installer in the community, but we'll go out to a number of them, and particularly those that we think share the common values with the program. And then we take those installers through a rigorous application process. So we look at their insurances, we look at their qualifications, we look at their licenses from the state government, we look at how long they've been in business, whether they've got any license breaches. We look at their warranties, which products they provide. We look at their customer service and how they interact with the households. So it's an application process which involves a meeting with the owner or the manager, so that we can understand how that installer will interact with the households that we will refer them to. So we have that relationship then with those installers. We don't receive any financial incentives from either any product manufacturers or installers. We are truly independent. What we do ask for of those installers is that they pass on a 5% discount directly to the household. So that 5% gets shown on the installer's quote, on their invoice, and it's passed directly to the household as a discount for joining the community electrification program. It is quite a long process, and I'm happy to take that offline if that doesn't answer your question. We had another question here from Gillian over in WA. How did you develop the instant estimate calculator? And how do we get this? For example, how would that be derived for Western Australia, which is obviously different to New South Wales? Veronica, would you like to?
Yeah, no problem. So yes, we developed the instant estimates initially for New South Wales. So they do contain, for example, New South Wales climate data, New South Wales grid emissions factors and things like that, as well as the typical things you find in New South Wales homes. These do vary a lot. When we go to other states, showing a fireplace in far north Queensland doesn't necessarily make sense. So, we've developed them through, we've had our technical team provide all of the calculations required and the input data required. We've then tested them with a whole lot of people to just see, what are the results and how does it compare to what the advisors provide. But in terms of adapting them to other states, yes, if we wanted to go into another state or territory, which, as I said, we're very keen to do, we do need to make adaptations to the instant estimates for them to be used in that new location. That includes changing some of the questions and the question answers to be things that are common in that state. It involves changing climate data in the back end of the model, as well as changing emissions factors and things like that. So, as well as changing the local pricing. So we do update the pricing based on the pricing in that local area. And so we need to go and find out what the pricing is to be able to update those instant estimates. So at the moment in New South Wales, if you come to our website, you can just jump on our website. We have the instant estimates open for New South Wales for anyone who'd like to come. But we only provide the advice and the rest of the process where we're running a program with a local council. But feel free to give them a try in New South Wales.
Yep. We've only got a couple of minutes left before we hit 3 o'clock, but we're happy to stay a bit longer and keep on answering these questions. But if you do need to go, thanks for your attendance today. And we will be sending out this recording and the document on your email later this week, so watch out for that. And then, as I said, each quarter we will be having one of these webinars on different topics. So we're just going to keep on going with questions, but if you need to leave us, totally understand. So the next question is from Sarah. Can you provide an example of when we've worked with a low-income group or a social housing group?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as you saw in the charts, we pulled this data and we realized that the engagement in lower income areas was lower than we would like. As a social enterprise, we really want to be very inclusive and making sure that we're reaching, people appropriately. So, an example of some of the times that we've been working with lower income groups, in some of our programs, we've had, for example, the case managers at the neighborhood center contact us, and they're in touch with highly vulnerable people who are living in social housing. Those people can't necessarily access our program directly. They would be able to, but it's not necessarily easy for them. They face a lot of life stresses. There's a lot of other things going on. They may have limited digital literacy. They may have limited access to, the mobile phone that would be required to do the instant estimate. And so what we've done there is we've actually spoken to those case managers at the neighborhood center, and we've shown them how to do the instant estimate and how to request advice from the advisor. And then we work with them and they go into the household. To give you an example, we had one case of a woman who was living in social housing and was receiving a $1,500 bill every quarter for energy. She was the only person living in the house. There was no heating. So obviously there's something seriously wrong there, potentially an electrical fault that she's being charged for. And she's behind on her bills, and she's receiving communications from the energy provider demanding payment. And she's working with her case manager to try and manage that from a financial distress point of view. But what we were able to do there is to work with the case manager and go, if you can go in and find this information and get copies of the bills and get consent from this person for us to assist, our advisor can work with you as the case manager and with this individual to help resolve the situation. And if needed, we can talk to the social housing provider and their maintenance department to find out what's going on here, to get it fixed and to provide some bill relief to this resident. So what we find is when we're talking about highly vulnerable groups, we really need to be working with people that they know and trust who are in their community, who are already in contact with them. And those people, like case managers, social workers, we often get aged care workers calling up on behalf of seniors. We get disability support workers contacting us on behalf of people who are living in supported accommodation, for example, under the NDIS. So we need to be working with those people to engage through them to assist people, if that makes sense. So what we discovered from doing this analysis, we could see our normal channels were not reaching the people that we were hoping to reach. And then we need to be working through a completely different channel to reach those people. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Next question I saw here was from Jonathan, and Jonathan was asking about tracking data on household consumption. So Jonathan, yes, we do track consumption in that on the dashboard that's available to councils in our program. We actually look at what impact the actions from the household has had on that household's energy consumption. So we track the reduction in electricity consumption, we track the reduction in emissions, and we do that on a dashboard that's available to council, so they can see the aggregated data for their LGA for the consumption of electricity and therefore emissions. So yes, we do that. There was another great question here. I'll throw to you, Peroska. Do you have, this is from Marianne, do you have some simple information that we could share or reassure our strata committees? They are worried about the cost of installing solar, and they won't let us put a charger in the basement as they are worried about EV fires. So do we have information available?
So typically what we find with strata, and strata is a really complex process. It can sometimes fall into the mission impossible category because the building itself, it's technically complex. But actually, the bigger issue is around group decision making. It's getting a group of people to work through the process of deciding that this is something that they want to do and passing the necessary resolutions to make that happen. What we have discovered through working with strata is that unfortunately, it's not normally as simple as providing sort of basic information. We do have on our website some general information for for strata solar. We don't have a huge amount on EV charging just yet, because what we've actually found is that the best way to get an apartment block through this process is for them to work with an advisor who specializes in strata. So we have a couple of our advisors who, in addition to being qualified around giving electrification advice, also have a significant amount of experience in strata, both in the technical side and also working with the strata committee and the owners corporation and the strata manager, and sometimes a building manager as well, to actually make our way through that process. So we don't have a sort of a nice pile of things we can send you just yet, but do check out our website and see what we've got on there. And yeah, we do find that for strata, it really needs a specialist to help that strata committee through the process, because people bring up all kinds of issues. It will be safety this time. It will be the cost of it next time. If you think about that personas chart, think about everyone on your strata committee is a different one of those personas. And so your ability to get it through depends on your ability to convince them all in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another question here. I think it was from John. He was asking about the cost of our program. So it's very difficult. It's a fair question, but it's a very difficult answer to give you on a webinar like this. I suppose what I would say about the cost of the program is we design the program for your community. So the cost is dependent on the size of your community, what groups exist in your community, because we need to be able to reach those different groups. So you might have a lot of strata in your community, or you might have an interest in reaching small businesses or low-income earners. So it's a discussion about what the program needs to look like so it is bespoke for your community. But in terms of broad numbers, our cost ranges from anywhere from 15 or 20,000 up to 40,000 for a 12-month program. But it really does depend on the community and what the community is expecting from the program. And so it's a discussion. I think we're almost to the end of the questions. There is one more here about EV chargers. There was a question from Marianne about, okay, so are we advocating for making EV charging in new builds mandatory? So would we as an organisation be advocating for EV charging stations in potentially new high-rise strata being mandatory? Oscar, can I throw that one to you?
Great question. So we have done a lot of work in strata and EV charging. It's really important that people living in apartment blocks are able to charge their EVs. It is a major barrier to people transitioning their cars. So would we be in favour of EV charging being mandatory in new buildings? Absolutely. The type of EV charging really depends. There's some really excellent new level 1 EV charging products on the market now that are significantly cheaper and mean that each person can plug their EV in their own bay and charge it on a level 1 charger, which just means like plugging it into a regular power point. And that can be significantly more cost effective and also more convenient than putting a level 2 fast charger in that everybody has to share. So yes, absolutely, we would be very much in favor of it being mandatory. It's quite hard to retrofit sometimes, and it, again, you've got to get through a strata process to retrofit it, so it's always easier to put it in from the beginning. But in terms of exactly how it's done, I think that needs some consideration.
Next question, I think it might be the last. Julie asked, do we give a plug for energymadeeasy.gov.au to encourage people to look around for a better deal? And the answer is yes, we do give that a plug. It's the official government website, and it does quite a good job these days. So yes, we do refer households to that. I'm just looking through the questions. I think we've covered off all the questions. If you're still on the call, there's 46 people still on the call. So if you did have a question, you want to pop it into the chat, go for it. And I'm just going to have a look through to see whether I've missed anyone. Apologise if I have. I will have a better look through these questions when we're offline. If there is anything that we have missed, I do apologise, and feel free just to flick me an email and get in contact. And happy to answer those questions offline.
I can see there's a couple of new ones.
Yeah, there's a couple of new ones down there. Are we able to include council subsidies? Yes, we are. So several councils in Sydney at the moment do offer rebates for things like solar batteries, heat pumps, etc. And we're able to include those in our estimates. Within that instant estimate, where we're giving households a range or an idea of what it would cost for a particular product, we are able to include those specific council subsidies in there, just with a little bit of a disclaimer to say they need to apply through council and there are criteria they need to meet. So yes, we can do that.
I can see another one here from Felicity. Have you had any cases where some councils who have amazing net zero or sustainability events has resulted in a higher rate of uptake? So in terms of, I'm assuming you're referring to in-person events. As you saw from the chart at the start, the table at the start, we have found that in-person events are really great for many reasons, but they generally don't result in a really high number of people coming into the program. What we have found is that where councils have really strong net zero targets or really strong community emissions targets, it does mean that the council is able to put more resources and more communications and more channels behind the whole thing. Not just events, but also, you know, they're more able to get the flyer in the rates notice. They've got more communications going out in their newsletters, and that does, all of those things together do increase uptake. But yeah, we haven't found in-person events to drive a huge volume, and we do find that the people that come to net zero or sustainability events tend to be in the eco nerd and optimization geek categories. So they're already kind of on their journey. They've already got a lot of knowledge, and they're not necessarily our target audience.
I think that's all the questions I can find in the chat, unless anyone has any further questions that they'd like to pop in there in the last couple of moments.
I think that's everything.
I think that's everything. So yeah, thanks everyone for your time this afternoon, and some great comments coming through, and great questions. Thank you for that.
Yeah, really, really appreciate you all taking the time, and your enthusiasm, and thank you for all the comments and questions. And if there's anything that we can help with, if we've got data that's useful, or you've got further questions that you think about later, just feel free to get in touch with either of us.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later, everybody.